Thereafter, the jurists have said that the forbidden mixing between men and women is at-tadammu wat-talasuq, by having bodily compaction and staying pressed together. That is, by having bodily contact and for them to be pressed together. If they're pressed together. As for what is other than that, then it is not a forbidden mixing as long as there is no sinful khalwa, as long as there is no sinful being alone in private where there is no third person. The women during the time of the Prophet ﷺ used to pray behind the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. I don't have it. I need it for the iPad. I need the link for the iPad.
Recording stopped.
The women during the time of the Prophet ﷺ used to pray behind the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, and after the last row of the men, without there being a barrier between the row of the men and the row of the women. The distance between the row of the men, which is followed by the row of the women, was about a little over a meter. This is because if the row after the Imam is farther than 3 cubits from the Imam, or the row that is after the row which is behind the Imam is farther than 3 cubits from the row in front of it, which is less than 1.5 meters, this would be disliked. As for what includes bodily compaction and staying pressed together, this is sinful if it was done deliberately. Otherwise, it is not forbidden, like what occurs during the circumambulation of the Kaaba and when the pebbles are being thrown at the stations and at the honored grave of the Prophet ﷺ in Al-Madinah. The contact that occurs there is not deliberate. Rather, it is because of intense crowding, and so it is not said that it is sinful. The Muslims have been on this up until these times. Now the situation in the mosque in Mecca and in Mina and at the places where the pebbles are thrown and in the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, it is still this way. So there is no designated time for the men and for the women. Rather, both parties meet at the circumambulation around the Kaaba and where they greet the Prophet ﷺ in his mosque and other than that. So in these types of situations, there is no forbidden mixing. And this is a proof for us, Ahlul Sunnah, that what the Wahhabis say is incorrect. What does that mean? That means that the Wahhabis, they claim that just by men and women being in the same place together with each other, and even if there's a third party, even if there's other people, they say that this by itself is forbidden. And we say that this is not the case, especially, and what proves that is what the scholars mentioned about making tawaf. So making tawaf, as you see, there is like a sea of people. And so in this case, we don't say that it's forbidden mixing. And also, when the pebbles are being thrown during the Hajj at the different stations, there's also a sea of people. So we don't say that this is forbidden mixing. And also at the honored grave of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Muslims, they are there gathering to say their salam to the Prophet ﷺ, the contact that occurs there is not deliberate. Rather, it is because of intense crowding. And so here, it would not be sinful because this is just the circumstance of the situation. So the Muslims, they have been on this or doing this or practicing this up until these times, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ until now. The situation how it is in the mosque in Mecca and in Mina where the pebbles are thrown, it is still this way. And there is no designated time, for example, where they say, now the men, they come and they can do the ritual. And then after that, the women, they come and they can do the ritual. There's no designated time. Rather, both parties, they meet at the tawaf around the Kaaba, and where they greet the Prophet ﷺ in his mosque, and other than that. As for men teaching young women and other than them the knowledge of the religion, this is a matter that the Muslims have agreed upon its permissibility, rather upon its obligation in general. The Prophet ﷺ came to a session where there were women on the day of Eid outside the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, and Bilal was with him. May Allah raise his rank. And so he preached to them and reminded them and ordered them with donating for charity, that is, to the welfare of the Muslims, not for himself, because it is sinful for him to consume charity, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Likewise, the pledge of allegiance that Allah ordered him to take from the Muslim women is a proof for the permissibility of men calling the women to a religious matter. Likewise, many companions were like that. Women and men used to seek them out to learn from them, just as the women from the companions were sought by men and women to learn the religion from them, like ad-Darda, the wife of Abu Darda. Furthermore, women remained throughout the eras acquiring knowledge from men, and men acquiring the knowledge from women without there being a sinful khalwa. In the 5th Hijri century in Damascus, there was a scholar of hadith who had no similar to him during that time. So there was a scholar of hadith that he was exceptional, and he was an exceptional scholar of hadith. And so he was called Ibn Asakir. That was his name, Ibn Asakir. He acquired the hadith from 1,000 men and 300 women. The one who claims it is sinful or disliked makruh for men to teach women the religion, then such a person is a kafir. The Prophet ﷺ never said that men only teach religion to men like them, nor did he ever say that men do not learn religion from women. Rather, teaching the religion among men and women is an obligation, and whoever says the opposite of that is a fabricator and an enemy to Islam. Those deviants do not have an Islamic proof. All they have is their claim coming out of their mouths, and they are not able to come with one verse or one authentic hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that confirms what they are claiming. We ask Allah to relieve us from their evil. I wonder, what do they gain by this lie about the religion? In the confirmed hadith narrated by Al-Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ said, بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. It means convey from me even one verse. Had it been sinful for men to convey the religion to women, he would have said, let the men convey from me to the men and women to the women. Yani, the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith did not specify one gender for the other. He didn't say, let the men convey from me to the men and the women to the women. He didn't make a restriction. He didn't say, convey from me, if you're a man, to another man only, and if you're a woman, to another woman only. He said, convey from me even one verse. Had the matter been as they say, Allah would have sent his prophets to the men and female prophets to the women. However, Allah did not send female prophets. This contains an apparent proof that the call to Islam is an obligation among both parties to both parties, that this is something that should be done from men to men and women, and from women to women and men. Hence the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. Its judgment is inclusive of males and females, just as the verse in Surah Al-Asr, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ, is inclusive of men and women, even if it was mentioned with the masculine term. None of that is specific to men except what the revealed law specified it to be for men. This is the case of most verses in the Quran and the Hadith. Nobody would argue about that except someone who perverts the religion. So basically there's no stance for the person who wants to claim that it's forbidden for men and women to, let's say, be together in the same place. Let's say like if there was a gathering, let's say if there was a lesson inside of a mosque or a musalla, and there were men and women that were attending, and they did not have any bodily contact. So let's say they were sitting in chairs or they were sitting on the floor, but they were sitting separate from each other. So this is not forbidden. I know that the Wahhabis, they claim that this is forbidden, but it is not forbidden. The only type of forbidden mixing between men and women is the mixing that has bodily compaction and staying pressed together. Like, for example, if someone is, let's say, they were in an open field and there was a large crowd of people, and the men and the women were standing, let's say, like shoulder to shoulder, pressed together. This is a forbidden free mixing. This is a forbidden mixing because it contains the bodily contact between members of the opposite gender that are marriageable to each other and are not, in fact, currently married. So when the people are marriageable to each other and they are not in that situation where they're married, then they cannot have bodily contact. So another example is like, let's say sitting on the bus or sitting on the train or sitting on the plane. There cannot be any, let's say, bodily contact. So for example, if the man is sitting there and there's a woman and her, let's say this part of her forearm is pressed against his, even with a barrier, this is forbidden. This is not permissible. So he has to basically, adjust himself in a way that he is not touching. Adjust himself in a way that he's not touching like that. Her part of her forearm is connected or like pressed up against his. He has to adjust himself. And usually, that's something that can be avoided, something that the person can make sure doesn't happen. So that's where the Shaykh finishes that class. Then we go to lesson 44, talking about some major sins. This lesson was given by the Hafiz, the scholar of Islamic law, Shaykh Abdullah, the son of Muhammad al-Abdari. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him, in the year 1398 after the Hijrah, and it clarifies some of the enormous sins. This lesson was heard from him by Shaykh Nabil, the son of Muhammad al-Sharif, and Shaykh Samir, the son of Sami al-Qadi. Hafidhahumullah Ta'ala. Page 220. Shaykh Abdullah, may Allah have vast mercy upon him, said, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, the universe. To him belong the endowments and proper commendations. May Allah raise the rank of our Master Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and his Muslim relatives, and protect his nation from that which the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam fears for it. Thereafter we have been made to narrate with a connected chain in the Sahih of Imam Ibn Hibban al-Busti, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him, with his chain to Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, may Allah Ta'ala raise his rank, that he said that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, ما من عبد يعبد الله لا يشرك به شيئا ويقيم الصلاة ويؤتي الزكاة ويصوم رمضان ويجتنب الكبائر إلا دخل الجنة. So here in this hadith we have a very good news. It means any slave who worships Allah without associating partners with him, and performs the prayer and pays the zakah and fasts Ramadan and avoids the enormous sins, enters paradise. So here the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is giving the good news to certain people that have or that follow this criteria. What does it mean? We're going to explain each thing individually, and we're going to go over each thing, mentioning in detail. And that's what this lesson is about, but we're taking it as a proof that the one who leaves out the enormous sins, and he's guaranteed, and the Muslim who leaves out the enormous sins, he's guaranteed to enter paradise without previous torture. So the author said, the Prophet ﷺ means that the one who does that enters paradise without any torture, neither in the grave nor in the hereafter. So the Prophet ﷺ is letting us know that the one who fits this description, then he enters paradise without previous torture. Yani he will not face any punishment. So the verse in Surah Al-Imran applies to this Muslim. كل نفس ذائقة الموت وإنما توفون أجوركم يوم القيامة فمن زحزح عن النار وأدخل الجنة فقد فاز وما الحياة الدنيا إلا متاع الغرور. So that verse that you recited, it applies to this Muslim who enters paradise without any torture in the grave nor on Judgment Day. Therefore, this Muslim who does what was mentioned, he is the one who will be taken far from hell and will enter paradise. And he is the one whom the verse in Surah Al-Kahf applies to. خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا لَا يَبْغُونَ عَنْهَا حِوَلًا. Everyone among the residents of paradise is pleased with his place in paradise, and he does not get bored from his long stay, and he does not deem little what he has from the endowments in that everlasting life. This hadith contains a lot of explanation and vast details, but we will suffice today with explaining the saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَيَجْتَنِبُ الْكَبَائِرِ, which means, and he avoids the enormous sins. Therefore, the enormous sins are the sins which give the impression that the one who commits them is not giving the proper care to the religion. This means that he gives little care, and they are close to 70 in number. Among them is ar-riba, and that is of different types. And the biggest is for a man to lend money to another and to make it a condition on him to get a benefit out of it for himself, or for himself and the lender, whether that condition was an added amount, or to let him live in his house for free until he pays the money back. Among the enormous sins is drinking alcohol, even if it was alcohol made from barley. So it doesn't matter if the alcohol was made from grapes. If it was made from grapes or barley or wheat or rice or any other fruit, yani whatever is made into alcohol, it is forbidden. And among them is sorcery, whether it was to make two people love each other or to hate each other, or to make the person become insane, or to inflict sickness on the one to whom sorcery is done, whether that was from enemy to enemy, or from a wife to her husband, so that he would obey her in everything, or from the wife's mother, so that her daughter's husband would obey her and would not disregard any of her orders. Na'udhu billah. There's some people who go that far. There's some people that they want something to that extent where they would make a sorcery for it. Sorcery is of different types. Among it is that which does not occur except by worshipping the devil, that is, by prostrating to him. Also among it is what contains words whose meaning is not understood, and in reality they might be symbols that the devil loves, and they do for the one who uses them what he wants and asks for. They mix in, when doing sorcery, some verses of the Quran to make people fall into kufr, by making them believe that the Quran can be used for sorcery. So for sure, the one who thinks that a verse of the Quran can be used to have a sorcery effect, or to be used in sorcery to make someone be under a spell or to make someone be affected by the sorcery, that person blasphemes. And whoever thinks that using a verse from the Quran can be used in sorcery, then such a person is outside of Al-Islam. Because basically the Quran is used to get rid of sorcery. But so what some people do is they pretend to add a verse of the Quran and they make someone think that this verse is involved in the sorcery effect. When in reality, what those people who they are using the sorcery, what they do is they are defiling the Quran. They defile the Quran. The one who thinks that the Quran is involved in making sorcery, then such a person is not a Muslim. And that is what the devil wants. Because many times those who use sorcery are ones who affiliate themselves to some of the Sufi orders, and despite that they work with sorcery. Some people think that they are guided sheikhs who bring the people close to the acceptance of God, while they are taking people further away from the acceptance of God. The devil got things mixed up for them. Among the enormous sins is to cut off the right of a Muslim by swearing while lying. Among the enormous sins is for the person to neglect providing his wife with the obligatory support, an-nafaqah, or his young children, or his poor parents when one is able to. So that's something that the Prophet ﷺ, that he made explicitly known. The Prophet ﷺ, in one of the hadiths, he said, it is enough of an evil, it is enough of a sin for the person to neglect those who he's obligated to support. So who is the man obligated to support? The husband is obligated to support the wife who is not nashiz. So if she becomes nashiz, then she loses her right of support until she stops being nashiz. Also, the man is obligated to provide for his prepubescent children. So if the man has prepubescent children, then he's obligated to provide for them food, clothing, and shelter. And also if the man has a slave, if he has, for example, slaves and let's say animals as well, he's obligated to provide for them. So he gives from the slave, and from the same type of sustenance that he gets. He doesn't feed them, let's say, something that is not edible for humans, like the non-Muslims that they did with their so-called slaves. Because what the non-Muslims did in the West and with most of the people, or a lot of the people from Africa, that was unjust. And it wasn't like the proper slavery. But still, and the way that they treated them was obviously, it's forbidden to treat your slave like that in Islam. You cannot overwork them. You cannot, let's say, mutilate them or abuse them or give them, let's say, food that is not consumed by humans to eat. So the man is obligated to support his slaves, if he has any, and also his animals. If he has animals, he has to provide for them. He has to give them what they need so that they can survive. And that is the obligation. So, like we said, if the wife is obedient, yani if she's not nashiz, then the husband is obligated to provide for her. If she becomes disobedient, she becomes nashiz, then he's not obligated to provide for her until she goes back to that. Now if the husband, let's say he divorces his wife, if it was just one divorce, then he's obligated still to provide for her food, clothing, and shelter, because it is a returnable divorce. But he's not allowed to live in the same place where there's no third person, etc. So as long as she is, let's say, divorced, and it's a returnable divorce, then he has to provide for her food, clothing, and shelter. And also, she cannot leave, let's say, that premises without his permission. So in that aspect, she'll still be treated like a wife, but in the aspect of staying alone without a third party, then this would be forbidden, of course. And with her being uncovered, etc., cannot be done in front of him. Now, if it was 3 divorces, if it was a non-returnable divorce, then he's not obligated to do the food and the clothing, only the shelter. So the ex-husband, he has to provide that for the duration of the postmarital waiting period, and that would be the place wherever the divorce took place, and so he would be obligated to provide that until the postmarital waiting period is over. Now in this case, it's not like the returnable divorce where the wife, the ex-wife, she is allowed to leave with his permission. Because if he gives her permission, then she can leave if it's a returnable divorce. In this case, when it's a non-returnable divorce, it would not be permissible for her to leave except for a need. Like, let's say she needed to sell something in the market to get some sustenance, so she goes to sell it and then she comes back. So that would be like during the daytime. But at night, it would not be permissible for her to leave unless it's like an emergency. Or if she, let's say, she went to a neighbor's house, to her neighbor to, let's say, chat, but she has to come back to that place where the divorce took place and spend the night there. So that is, and among the enormous sins is for the person to neglect providing his wife with the obligatory support and nafaqah, and that applies to the ex-wife in the returnable divorce and in the non-returnable. For the returnable, he has to do food, clothing, and shelter. For the non-returnable, he just has to do the shelter. Also among them is to kill the animal by starving it or dehydrating it to death. And so animal abuse in this scenario, this case, is forbidden. Among the enormous sins is to hit the Muslim severely, unrightfully, like the one who hits his wife because she disagreed with him in a matter that is not a religious obligation upon her, like the one who hits his wife because she did not cook the food well, or because she did not go with him for an outing to bad places in which prohibitions are done. Rather, this second one, his sin is multiplied because he wanted to force her to do a sin which Allah made forbidden. However, if she goes along with him without an excuse in committing the sin, then she is sinful as well. SubhanAllah, some men would beat their wives because they want to go to the club and they want their wife to go to the club with them, but their wife refuses, so they would beat their wives. So, in a haram way, in an unjust way. Some men, they beat their wives if she didn't make the food properly. So if the rice was not cooked how he wanted, he might beat his wife, na'udhu billah. And that's an enormous sin. Among the enormous sins is for the wife to refuse her husband without a religious excuse if he calls her to bed. Indeed, she would be an enormous sinner to the extent that it was mentioned in the hadith that the woman who spends the night while her husband is angry with her because she refused his calling her to bed without her having a religious excuse, the angels damn her until the morning. What is astonishing is that many women make sure to cook and clean the house, and they do not make sure to fulfill this right that is a religious obligation. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا دَعَى الرَّجُلُ زَوْجَتَهُ فَلْتَأْتِهِ وَلَوْ كَانَتْ عَلَى التَّنُّورِ. This means, if the husband calls his wife to bed, let her come, even if she was at the tannur. Yani something that they used to bake on. Yani the meaning is that she needs to make sure that she comes. Among the enormous sins is leaving out learning the obligatory knowledge of the religion, even if it was orally during hearing the information without writing or taking notes. So it counts if the person just listens to the obligatory knowledge, even if he didn't write anything down or took any notes. There is no difference in this between the male and the female, because the one who does not learn falls into the enormous sins whether he wanted to or not. And he will not be able to ensure that his prayer is valid, or his fasting, or his zakah, or his marriage. Yani, if the person did not learn the obligatory knowledge, he will not be able to know or be sure that his prayer is valid, because he doesn't know what are the conditions, he doesn't know what are the invalidators, he doesn't know what are the integrals. Same thing with the fasting, same thing with the zakah, same thing with the marriage. How many people live in a sinful relationship due to their severe ignorance, like the ones who divorced their wives 3 times, but they continue having a sexual relation with the women they divorced, and so they fall into fornication. Yani because they said the statement in a state of anger, and because they're ignorant, they think that if you do it while you are angry, that it doesn't count. Or they think that if you say the statement, let's say in one statement, if the person says, I now divorce you, if the person says to his wife, I now divorce you 3 times, some ignorant people, they think that this doesn't count, but it does count. And so because they thought that it didn't count, they continue living with that woman as if she is his wife. And so every time that he is with her in that way, she would be fornicating, and he would be fornicating. And sometimes that person, he goes to a corrupt, someone pretending to be a sheikh, and he goes to him and he says, what can I do in order to make her halal for me again? And then that person, he would tell him something like, go to the ocean and wash yourself in the ocean 7 times. And then someone might say, jump over a broom on Sunday at 3 p.m. and then she'll be back your wife again. Na'udhu billah. And they pay him, that person, money for that, and then supposedly they go and do what he said, and they think that they are again married. So this is the consequence, or that is the result of being ignorant in the knowledge of Islam, that these enormous sins occur. And of course, the biggest danger is for the person to commit blasphemy because of his ignorance. And of course, that's an enormous sin as well, but we're talking about the enormous sins that are less than blasphemy. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. Next week, inshallah, we'll cover lesson 45, which is clarifying the details about the innovation. Today in this session, we did lesson 44 and 43, alhamdulillah. So we did get a lot of benefit. This next lesson, lesson 45, it is a long one. So it has 2 parts, part 1 and part 2, which would be lesson 45 and 46. So we are, inshallah, we will continue next week. If there are no questions, we'll conclude. If you have a question, just write it in the chat. Yeah, what is it? It
says, what does
Nashes. What does nashes mean? I don't have it. Check where it is. It's not here. It's not here. So nashes is referring to the wife, if she, for example, leaves his house without his permission, or she, for example, she refuses, he calls her to his bed, she refuses, or if she speaks harshly to the husband, this is all called nashes. So that means that she, the loosely translated, disobedient. So she loses her right of support. Like for example, if she hits her husband, she's nashes. No. That's it? طيب نهلل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات وبارك الله فيكم السلام عليكم